All right. Hey, we're starting a new series today. It's a series we took 2 weeks to prep for because family's messy. I don't know about you. My family's messy. My sister's sitting here, so she's going to... Okay. But look at, my mom was a widow with 4 kids. She married my dad, who had been divorced, who had a couple of kids. Back in the day when divorce was a stigma. They got together, and surprise, in their 40s, they had a wonderful little blessing of surprise, right? And then a few years after that, my dad died, and my mom was back to being a single mom and a widow, raising a kid. That's messy. It's not bad. It's just maybe not what you would consider normal. But here's the thing I've learned in all my years of ministry. What is normal? American society, right, oftentimes culture is represented in TV and movies. In the 60s, you know what was normal family? A single income family. A dad who left to bring in the finances and a mom who stayed at home to raise her son. In the 70s, it was a blended family, right? Mike Brady's wife died, brought the boys with the girls. We have no idea what happened to Carol's husband. He disappeared, right? Sometimes I wonder, what's the true story, Carol? All right, we never know. We never know. Blended family, though. Then in the 80s, right, we had Full House, where a single dad's wife dies. And he has 2 single guys come to join him. One of them's a relative. These 3 guys are raising a family of girls. Right? That's normal. And then it was Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, where a family opens up, brings in an extended family member, and they live with him. He lives with them, and they love him, and they raise him like a son. Then there was Modern Family, right? And this is where, all right, this talk about confusion. It's not Modern Family. It's actually 3 families in one, connected by 2 siblings and an older dad, who was a patriarch of the family, who was divorced, married a woman who had immigrated to the United States. It was a biracial family that they were raising with a son that he brought into his own family, with a daughter who was, her husband, it was a single income family until she got a job, and they had 3 kids. And then there was a gay couple who adopted a child from Vietnam and eventually got married. Family is messy. It's just the way it is. Some people say to me, well, you got to talk about biblical families. Okay. Would that be the family with concubines and multiple wives? Would that be the family with a husband who commits adultery and is considered a friend of God? Right? Would that be a family? Let's see. Family with slaves? Ooh, that got awkward. Or how about, you understand that Joseph is a stepdad, right? Just saying. Right? Joseph was a stepdad. He wasn't Jesus' father. Right? And what about the disciples? We'll look to the disciples. Okay, how many were married? We have no idea, except we know that Peter had a mother-in-law. Outside of that, we know nothing about their family lives. Even when we turn to the Bible, family is messy. Okay. So we're going to go into a series in the book of Matthew in which he talks about marriage, divorce, being single, and touches on parenting. It's like walking through a minefield. All right. Today we're going to look at marriage. And this is a statement, this is the premise coming out of what we're going to look at today from Matthew 19. Matthew was trained by Jesus, listened to Jesus, recorded his teachings. Marriage is a sacred gift from God to be protected, honored, and nurtured with love for a lifetime. And people go, really? Right? For some of us, we go, really? Yes. I'll talk about why. Though I know it doesn't feel like that for everybody. This is also, this series, one of the most difficult series I've ever preached through. Because family is messy. In today's world, I can't even use the word father without sparking pain in people. I can't talk about marriage without hitting people in deep places. And to talk about divorce strikes chords of guilt and shame and fear in people. I love people. And it's hard to go into places where the words you use, though you don't intend it, can bring hurt. So please be gracious with me. And let's pray together. God, I just want to pray. God, I want to help people. And sometimes, Lord, I know the things I say, they're complex and they really need a dialogue, not a monologue. I'm praying that your Holy Spirit will do something in this room that I did not expect, that will go beyond my expectations. That you'll speak, Lord, through me in tender, loving ways to elaborate your scriptures and to bring truth as I see it today to bear. And help us, Lord, to listen in love. Help me to speak in love. And may your Spirit do a loving thing in our lives. Father, I trust you in this moment because you're my Father and my God. Amen. So let's go. This is the Gospel of Matthew. Gospel means good news. Like I said, Matthew was trained by Jesus. If you got a Bible with you, that's awesome. If you got it on your phone, it's going to be easy for you to go to Matthew 19. And we're going to pick up there. When Jesus had finished saying these things, this is what comes before this. This was all the way back in June when we did a series called The Importance of One. That's what Matthew's referencing. He's just trying to connect this. Jesus had this powerful conversation, series of teachings and encounters to emphasize the importance of individuals and single decisions. That's why we call it the power of one. Well, he left Galilee, went down to the region of Judea, east of the Jordan River, and large crowds followed him there. That's important to Matthew. And he healed their sick. So what Matthew is trying to say is Jesus' movement is growing. There's a surge, a big following. And if you've been kind of tracking along in the series or you've read the Gospel of Matthew, you also know that he's poking the bear with people who are religious leaders and the way that religion had become stale at that point, and that is infuriating some. So his message is bothering them, and the popularity of his movement is increasing. So some Pharisees came to test him. Pharisees, we've talked about Pharisees before. Pharisees are these strict religious leaders. They love the Bible. They study the Bible. It's the Bible that we would call the Old Testament. Memorize large portions of it, some the whole thing. They developed a series of rules that you had to live by in order to fulfill the commandments they found in the Bible that would make you acceptable to God. Over 600 rules. Rigid spiritual practices. That's Pharisees. But here's the interesting thing. They asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? Because that was a big debate. As conservative and rigid and rigorous they were all over the map on some social issues. Marriage was one of them, and divorce. Because there was one group that said, you know what? You can get married for any reason. She burnt the toast. She's not looking so hot anymore. You met somebody who was more hot than her. Sure, just, you know what? Go ahead. It's fine to get a divorce. There was another group that said, no. You should only get a divorce for very specific and rare occasions. We're going to talk about that next week. There was even a third group that said, never. Nope, never. So they're kind of spread. Isn't it remarkable that this very conservative group, when it came to scriptures and their spiritual practices, were all over the map about social issues, which isn't uncommon. Because as rigorous as we try to be, we all have desires and we try to create loopholes for our desires. Okay? And I sympathize with Jesus. I've been in this situation where someone comes up and says, hey, Pastor Mike, what's your opinion on? And then there is a whole series of things that just explodes in my mind. Why are they asking this? What's the point of this conversation? Are they trying to trap me? Are they trying to pigeonhole me? What are they going to do with what I'm about to say? Are they trying to really care about the church and help? Are they truly interested in this? Or are they going to use this to create division? Matthew is using the word test to help us understand this was not a sincere question. Most likely they were trying to trap Jesus. Because if Jesus looked at this, is it all right to get a divorce away for any and every reason? He said yes. The conservatives could say, look at this liberal. He doesn't believe in the Bible. And if he said no, then the liberals' approach would say, look at this conservative, this Bible-thumping conservative that just wants to make life hard for you. You know what their true intention was? Let's divide the movement. Because when we can create division in the movement, we can slow it down, maybe even destroy it. This is hard. This issue is about people. People who are hurting, looking for direction, and trying to figure out how to live life. And the Pharisees want to turn this around and take this issue about people and turn it into some type of political thing. And we should never do that. We should be the people committed to God's love, trying to help people. They're trying to disarm his movement. So Jesus' response is brilliant. Haven't you read? To a bunch of people who just love the Bible and build their lives on it, Jesus is saying, let's go back to the Bible for guidance. Let's go back to the Bible to see what it has to say. And then Jesus does something. He's going to take two statements that come from the very beginning of our Bible, and he's going to pull an application off of it. Because Jesus says, at the beginning, the Creator made them male and female, and for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they're no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. So let's go back to the beginning of the Bible and look at the two statements Jesus said and consider them in the context of where they're at in the Bible. This is the passage Jesus is quoting. God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. I always teach the Bible doesn't underline, make bold, or italicize to make an emphasis. It uses repetition. And 3 times what is stated is that God is involved in creation. 3 times. Remember, once is important, 2 is really important, 3 is don't forget this. Right? So when it repeats it the 3rd time, what the author is trying to say is like God is intimately involved in the creation of humanity. We weren't an accident. God designed us. That's the first thing. The second thing is we have tremendous value because we bear the image of God. I want to say this clearly. Every single person bears the image of God in some form. Male and female, he created them. We have biological distinction from God at creation to fulfill our purpose. God blessed them and said, this is the next sentence, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and govern it. Reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and all the animals that scurry along the ground. We were created in order to fulfill a purpose, to spread humanity, and to guide the world the way God would. Now, a couple of things, 2 things. 1, I'm 59. God, that sounds wicked old, right? Sorry, Lord. Sorry. 59 years old. Language has changed significantly in my 59 years. Words that once were derogatory aren't anymore. Words that aren't intended to be derogatory can be received that way. So I am truly not trying to insult or hurt people with the words I use. I'm learning. Second, science is developed faster than we can understand it. Right? So words around gender identity and science understanding about sexuality is moving so fast it's hard to keep up with it. Just saying. You know, that whole debate about people in terms of gender and sex, is it nature, nurture, or culture, is like, yes. And we're still figuring it out. Okay? So I'm just saying it. And why do I say that? Because the minute I said we're created male and female, some people said, really? Because I struggle with that. Because we've had conversations with individuals. I've heard conversations with individuals. I've read things written by individuals when they said, I'm in tremendous conflict. I know what my physical biology is, and yet internally I don't feel like it matches. It's a battle for me. And they use words like confused, sad, depressed, crisis of faith. I want to say this clearly. You have value to God and you are loved by him. I know people who struggle to have children. And they see this command and they're like, really? I would love to have my own children and can't. You are valued by God and loved by him. I understand there are individuals who's like, I always wanted to be married, and it has never worked out. You are valued by him, and you are loved by him. And I think that's true. And those statements are complicated statements. To work through those statements really needs dialogue, not monologue. But I'm on a platform. I have promised anyone who wants to have a conversation can meet with me, and we'll make sure that happens, because those are three complicated statements that really deserve to be unpacked. Okay? I just want everyone to know you are valued by God and loved by him. Everyone. And this is the thing. We're living in what I call a post-rebellion world. Let me explain what that means. There is a key moment in the first book of the Bible where we understand that humanity rebels against God and creates the world in their own image rather than God's image. That's complicated. But what I mean by that is the minute they rebelled, everything changed. And suddenly, blessings feel like burdens, like I just described. In a pre-rebellion world, everything's a blessing because it's not complicated. It hasn't been impacted by rebellion. In a post-rebellion world, everything has been impacted. Relationships, identity, fertility, you name it, it's been impacted in a post-rebellion. We're living in a post-rebellion world where families are messy. And you know what we need to do? We need to be kind to one another and work it out together. We should all be pursuing Jesus together. Kind, gentle, and loving, qualities of the character of Christ, and just being with each other, trying to figure it out, because it's a mess. Well, Jesus quotes from another place in the scriptures. In this first book, and this is pre-rebellion. That's why a man leaves his father and mother, is united to his wife, and the two become one flesh. And what do I think this means? I think it means that we're created biologically as a representation of a spiritual, emotional, and relational reality. And repeat that. I think that we are created biologically for a spirit, as a representation of a spiritual, emotional, and relational reality. That marriage is meant to be 1 + 1 = 1. So anybody who enters into the concept of, well, if it doesn't work out, just get divorced, doesn't understand that God's intention is that marriage is meant to be permanent. It's where we work it out. Now, Jesus takes those two statements, and then he makes an application off that statement. So he says, at the beginning, the Creator made them male and female, and for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife. The two will become one flesh. So, that's the application. They're no longer two, but they're one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. There's three important words in this. What I read to you, the English version, was based off of ancient Hebrew. When Jesus is speaking, he's speaking Greek, and he makes a subtle change in the language he uses. It's really important for us to pick up, because there's three words here we should pay attention to. United, joined, separate. You know what a great word for united is? Velcro. Industrial strength Velcro. The type of Velcro they use in machine shops. Or an even better word than Velcro, weld. That's what that word means. It means that you bring something together. In the ancient world, it would have been like cement or mortar between blocks. The idea is you take two things and you join them together so that those two things are now inseparable and become one. That's what you do when you weld metal, right? Is that meant to be taken apart? By its nature, no. And when he talks about joined, you know what he's literally talking about, which in our world would be an insult? He's talking about the yoke that went between two oxen, yoked together. Because of what that thing represented was that you brought two things together and you combined them in a way that they had more power and more effectiveness by being together than they would have had being separate. Because that's about marriage. We're supposed to come together in such a way that we are better and stronger together than we are separate. That's the point. And when he says separate, he means in a destructive way. Think of the tearing apart of fabric that's been sewn together. Think of the destruction of a brick wall. That's what Jesus is saying. Because Jesus is saying, if we're going to talk about divorce, which we are going to talk next week, in some ways this is part 1 to next week's part 2. Jesus is saying we've got to start with the idea of marriage. And what was God's intention behind that idea? Because God's intention is that it's a sacred gift. From the beginning of time, from the first couple, it was meant to be given to humanity as a gift that we protect, honor, and nurture with love for a lifetime. But in a post-rebellion world, it doesn't always work like that. I think heterosexual couples need to remember that just because we're heterosexual, that doesn't make us better than anyone else. Heterosexual marriages have intense conflicts that is not part of God's design for marriage. Right? Yeah, I know. Now you're like, oh, what? Okay. Because inevitably, if we're going to talk about marriage in today's world, we have to discuss same-sex marriage. So let's engage in this conversation for a minute. This is a book put out by NAV Press. NAV Press is a very conservative Christian publication house. Us versus Us. It's based on a scientific research study of over 1,700 members of the LGBTQ plus community, every state in the United States. Great conversations, heartbreaking results. Because the question that they were exploring is, what is the religious experience of LGBT? So how they put it in the books. That's how I'm going to reference it here. LGBTQ people. 83% of the people that they, in this survey, and it was a random survey, said that they had been a part of a Christian church at some point in their life. Catholic or Protestant. 83%. Do you understand what that means? That the vast majority of members of the LGBTQ plus community started in church or tried church. 51% left. Only 3% left of what we would call the church's traditional belief about sexuality and marriage. 3% of that 51. So why did the rest of them leave? They didn't feel safe. The mocking jokes, the derogatory statements, the aggressive posture of people. This one breaks my heart. They felt a relational disconnect from leaders. An unwillingness to dialogue about the issue. This is amazing to me that this is an issue where we shut down. Remember last week I showed you 10 things that Christians think are really important? We don't dialogue well. That's why we had 2 weeks of hard conversation in a loving manner, because we refused to enter into the conversation except to win. That's what the Pharisees did. The Pharisees wanted to have an important discussion about human beings in order to win a point and disrupt a movement, not because they loved people. And unfortunately, that's what we're doing. Or they just plain got kicked out. Which makes me wonder, if you're going to kick someone out for being a member of the LGBTQ plus community, who else are you going to kick out? People who lie? People who steal? Right? People who don't celebrate the Sabbath? Those are part of the 10 Commandments. Once we begin kicking people out because we feel they don't agree with, they're not acceptable to us because they don't perform by a standard that we hold, our circle gets really small until sometimes we find ourselves standing alone. I'm going to elaborate more of this. This quote is a beautiful quote. All I wanted, this is from a woman, she's lesbian, and she was in part of the interview process, and she said, you know what all I wanted was to feel loved by those in the church I grew up with. What's wrong with that? Right? Love is giving me time to be with you, to figure out this together. If you let any church people read this, tell them, I don't have to be right to be loved. I have to be dignified in our disagreement. That's a beautiful statement. That's what I've been saying for the last 2 weeks. I just want to be loved by my church. You don't have to look at me and say you're right. I just want to be treated with dignity as we have a disagreement with one another. Shouldn't that be the nature of every faith group in this church? Shouldn't that be the way someone feels walking into our church, participating in our student ministries, going to Faith Kids? It's like, you know what, I'm trying to figure this thing out. Will you accept me? Will you love me? Will you treat me with dignity? Why not? I'm having a hard time finding a reason. So the question becomes, where do I stand and how do I apply it? This is hard because I love people. I just think that's the core call, is to love people. So here's where I stand. In a pre-rebellion world, God designed a man and a woman for marriage. And I think that's the definition of marriage in a pre-rebellion world. In a post-rebellion world, it's all a mess and we're trying to figure it out. We should be a lot more gracious in that mess. Because like I said, we're a 300-year-old church and we have gotten it really wrong in our past. If anything, a church like ours should be humble and recognize we've made horrible mistakes in our past, that by our standards today, some would say we're complicit in a social evil. Remember racism? Our first pastor had slaves. That should produce inside of us a humility that says, I'm willing to figure this out with you. Are you willing to walk through it with me? Right now, in my lifetime, would I perform a same-sex marriage? Officiate it? No. Because this is where I am in my journey. Would I attend? Absolutely. If someone I loved and who loved me invited me to go, of course I would go. Because I love them. So I would go. I understand. Some people just go like that. I'm sorry about that. This is where I am today. Why am I saying today? Because you know what I thought when I first graduated seminary? Women should not be pastors. I changed my mind on that. When I graduated seminary, you know what I thought? Jesus Christ is the representation of God, 100% God and 100% human. Guess where I am today? Exactly the same place. Aren't I complex? Right? If a gay couple came to me and they said, hey, we're having struggles and we're looking for some marital counsel, would you provide it? I'd say absolutely. Because I believe that God's desire for all of humanity is to have healthy relationships. I think it's good for the community. It's God's desire. And I rarely ever have led anyone to get a divorce. Honestly. Have I? On rare occasions. We'll talk about that next week. But I'm not going to do it just because you come to me as a same-sex couple, and you'll understand more next week. If a couple wants to come into our church and they want to grow in their relationship and pursue Jesus Christ, I would say, come on in. Open up the scriptures. Let's talk together. I trust God that with His Holy Spirit and with His Word in the midst of community, He's going to lead us to discover Him and to grow in Him. Okay. I used to be optimistically naive, and I used to say, everybody, come on in. But you know what? I'm sorry. What I'm describing is what's called the mess of ministry. And I know that because it's happened. Gay couples come in, they love the church, they want to grow in their relationship with Christ, and they left because they were rejected by people in our church. Isn't that terrible? They were trying to pursue Jesus. And we said no, because you're not enough like us. And where does that statement stop? If you come into our church and you're genuinely pursuing a relationship with Jesus Christ and you feel like that, would you talk to me so I can help you? This is what I think. I think that in our journey with Jesus Christ, we should accept someone as they are today, share ourselves as we are today, and humbly recognize we're on a journey, still growing and changing. Now, I want to start with an apology. As a reminder, I'm going to start with an apology. In the course of my lifetime, I have said things that are offensive, intentionally and unintentionally, to members of the LGBTQ plus community. And I'm so sorry. I deeply, deeply regret those comments. And I understand that if you're gay, trans, whatever, in the LGBTQ community, you look at me and you would say, why would I go to an evangelical church? Because evangelical churches in America that have promoted the love of God and Jesus Christ have not been loving to members of the LGBTQ plus community. We make posters and signs that demonstrate that. We've been horrible to that. You know, I also understand the reasoning behind the idea that people looking at me and say, well, you're homophobic and prejudiced. I actually have thought this through, and I understand your rationale. But you know what I would hope? I would hope that you would take the risk to get to know me, and what you might discover is a more complex than a binary statement like that, and a more loving than you might have expected. Because in the midst of that conversation, I've had wonderful conversations with members of the community, LGBTQ plus community, where we are in different positions. They were some of the most respectful, mature, and honest conversations I've had with people on these issues. My admiration for them grew. I would hope that I would surprise you. I would hope that you would challenge me. And rightfully so, if I needed to apologize, I'd hope I'd have the humility to apologize. But remember, from all the way back to the beginning, folks, this is an issue about people pursuing Christ. And we've got to become more loving, gentle, and kind to anybody who wants to pursue Christ with us. Even if we have deep differences of opinion. Here's the thing to remember leaving this place. I don't care who you are, but you're beautiful in the eyes of God. You reflect His image. You have value. He loves you, and you're beautiful to Him.